It's now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Vice Admiral Bill Gortney. He's a man who has significant perspective on the last 10 years of the wars that we've been fighting. In the opening months of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Bill was the 06 that the Navy sent to work with the Combined Forces Air Component Commander at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia to make sure that went right, and it did. Bill was also in command at 3 levels, always in the Persian Gulf during the last 10 years. First, he was Air Wing Commander at Carrier Air Wing 7, embarked on the JFK. Later, he came back as a Strike Group Commander, Strike Group 10, Harry S. Truman Strike Group, and then ultimately, 2008 to 2010, he commanded the entire 5th Fleet and Naval Forces Central. Walking over here with Bill, we kind of did the math as best we could. It looks like over 6 of those 10 years, Bill drew the combat exemption for tax-free status and almost achieved expat status in continuous service over there. In between those command tours I mentioned, he took a break by spending 2 years ashore in Bahrain as the Chief of Staff for NAVCENT and 5th Fleet. That's a lot of time in Southwest Asia. And he's currently getting his R&R as Director of the Joint Staff in the Pentagon in Washington. But Bill got some great news yesterday, and I think many of you saw the announcement, but the President of the United States yesterday announced that Bill's been nominated for his 4th star and for assignment as the commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces in Norfolk, Virginia. Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Gortney.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. Wow. That was quite an introduction, Pete. The only hard part of that is coming off of 6 years of tax-free. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm honored to have the opportunity to join you here this morning, especially to be able to kick off this event. A special thanks to my longtime shipmate, Pete Daly, for his role in setting this up. It's a little humbling to be the first speaker. At the same time, I realize that I'm really just the second string pinch hitter here for the originally invited CNO. I greatly appreciate the introduction. Most people don't know what the Director of the Joint Staff does. And to naval audience, I describe myself as the Chang of the Joint Staff. I keep the ship moving through the water, and when a CHT line breaks, my phone rings. Now, I'm going to attempt to keep you awake with some prepared remarks and then turn the forum over to you to pepper me with questions that I'll endeavor to answer. So please give some thought as to what you'd like to ask me, and someone please be ready to rush to the microphones to ask the question to get the question and answer session going. Before I get started, I commend you for having this event in San Diego in January of all months. I know I'm not the only speaker who made the arduous trip from Washington, D.C. to be here. I'm just the first one to tell you how happy we are to be out of D.C. to be here with you. What an experience working in the Pentagon is. Out of body comes to mind. I've never been at a place where people work so hard and produce so little product in my entire life. I have to continually tell the staff that remembering the work we do in the Pentagon, 95% of the product never leaves the building, but the 5% that does impacts every single soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman in our armed forces today. Now, over the next several days, you'll have the opportunity to hear from an impressive collection of speakers, active duty and retired flag and general officers, civilians, and other leaders of the sea services. And given the level of detail those speakers will be able to provide in the forum that they have, I want to start to focus on my remarks more at the strategic level and to specifically address 3 main areas. The first one is the strategic landscape. The second is the fiscal landscape. And then the third is defense strategic review. I'll put a little meat on the bones and give you some operational level detail in the process, but I hope you'll keep in mind this big picture even after I leave the podium. I think it'll be important to refer to the big picture as you listen to the discussions for the rest of the week. Many of the speakers, a wide variety of speakers and panelists over the coming days, many of whom will be able to speak at the operational and tactical. So keeping that eye on the strategic will be important. At the strategic level, there are three things that readily come to mind. The first is the duration and the impact of the Arab Spring. The second is the withdrawal of U.S. military forces from Iraq and the drawdown of the surge forces from Afghanistan. And amidst these changes, in the Middle East, the renewed interest in the Asia-Pacific region. At the same time, as you do this, think about these events. It's important to note that the strategic landscape is far more inclusive. It also includes the four main threats to our nation: nuclear proliferation, extremism, cyber attacks, and how we deal with rising powers. It should come as no surprise that the strategic landscape is directly and completely connected to our nation's fiscal landscape. Now, is there anyone in this audience who does not believe our national debt is a strategic vulnerability to our nation? Go ahead, raise your hand if you do. All right? Now, one might argue the degree of vulnerability, but not the vulnerability itself. Now, my personal opinion, this is Bill Gortney's personal opinion and no one else's, I believe it is the largest strategic vulnerability our nation faces today. Now, I'm just a history major from Elon College, and ciphering and finances are not my greatest strength. But if we're to get our national debt under control, we need to do two things. We need to spend less, and we need to bring in more revenue. Now, there are multiple ways to do both, and none of them are easy. But we as a nation had better figure out how to get her done. And this means everyone in America will need to tighten their belts, to include the Department of Defense. Now, the Defense Department started working on how to deal with the major budget changes more than a year ago. And at that time, we were looking at about a $110 billion reduction. Ultimately, OSD and the services began working on a nearly $500 billion target, $500 billion, and that's some pretty serious money over 10 years. Now, it works out to be $259 billion over the 5-year FYDP, but the reason for the reduction is entirely predictable. On the backside of every major conflict, the DoD budget has declined 27 to 32%, and this goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War. But this time there are two key differences. First, we're still engaged in combat in Afghanistan, and the second, our national debt, which is not held by the American citizens like after World War II, but a large percentage of it is held overseas. Now, it was a fascinating time to be sitting on the backbench watching DoD leadership decide how to handle this challenge, and the following are my observations. In the beginning, it was all about the money, with all discussions of strategy deeply in lag. We were rapidly deconstructing our current force and not constructing the force we will need in 2020. Now, starting under Admiral Mullen and then General Dempsey and the Secretary were determined to fix this, and their solution was first, develop a strategy, second, develop a budget to meet that strategy, and third, keep an eye on the fiscal reality throughout the process. Now, the effort was unprecedented in its inclusiveness, the most important being the President's involvement throughout. The service chiefs and the COCOMs were fully involved in meeting with the President for many of those discussions. Now, with the strategic and fiscal landscape in mind, the President and the Defense Secretary, Panetta, rolled out the strategic guidance earlier this month. Now, the four guiding principles of that strategic guidance are: 1, maintain the world's finest military and sustain U.S. global dominance. 2, do not hollow out the force. 3, everything is on the table. There are no sacred cows. And 4, preserve the quality of the all-volunteer force and not break faith with the all-volunteer force. The strategic guidance provides a blueprint for the joint force in 2020 that includes 5 characteristics. The force is smaller and leaner, but more agile, flexible, deployable, technologically advanced. We're going to rebalance global posture, Asia-Pacific and the Middle East. We will strengthen key alliances, build partnerships, develop new ways to sustain U.S. presence elsewhere in the world. 4th, we must ensure we can confront aggression while no longer sizing our ground forces for large-scale, prolonged stability operations. And 5th, we'll protect investment in special ops, new technologies in ISR, space, and cyberspace, and we have to have the capacity to quickly mobilize. Now, Secretary Panetta also discussed the fact that the Defense Department will be reducing the size of our ground forces. We had increased Army and Marine Corps end strength to meet the demands of 2 wars over 10 years. Now, the Iraq War has ended, and we're drawing down to pre-surge levels in Afghanistan. The reductions will be responsible and measured, and they're focused on treating people fairly, and will include what we call reversibility, because the future has an uncertain tint to it. Throughout these reductions, we'll maintain the force at a high state of readiness, extensive and more realistic training, and we have to reset our equipment. We must provide the critical technological edge, which is our second most important advantage on the battlefield. But the Secretary also clearly stated that the DoD will maintain our commitment to attract and keep the best quality people, because they are our greatest advantage on the battlefield. He is a genuine people guy, if you haven't figured that out. And even facing tremendous fiscal pressures, everything possible has been done to protect service members and families and civilian employees that support them. Still, we must make adjustments to slow growth in personnel costs. To be frank, we have a duty to put those costs on a sustainable track, even as we make sure our service members get the generous pay and benefits they have so richly earned. Now, despite claims by many, we do not believe we must sacrifice national security to achieve fiscal responsibility. From challenges also comes opportunity, an opportunity to craft a force better suited to confront the threats of the 21st century, focusing on by 2020. At the end of the month, the Secretary and the Chairman will roll out the budget to meet this strategy, and I'll tell you up front, I'm unable to discuss the specifics of the budget, but considering a $259 billion reduction over 5 years, the Navy and Marine Corps team fare better than one might expect, but that is a function of the strategy. Evidence of this was the Secretary's remarks this past Saturday on board the USS Enterprise, when he announced that as a result of the strategic review, it was decided to maintain our carrier force structure at full strength, keeping 11 carriers in the fleet. Speaking of the Big E, I find it hard to comprehend that in the centennial in naval aviation, we also celebrated 50 years of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers with Big E's 50th birthday. With the daunting task of dealing with the strategic and fiscal landscape I discussed earlier, Admiral Greenert, the man originally scheduled to be at this podium today, came into office and laid out his guidance. Our CNO established what is important, what endures. And despite being written months before the release of DoD's strategic guidance, the reality is that the CNO's sailing directions are fully consistent with the DoD strategic guidance. He desires our Navy mission and describes our Navy mission and core responsibilities. Deter aggression, and if deterrence fails, win our nation's wars. Employ the global reach and persistent presence of forward station and rotational forces to secure the nation from direct attack. Assure joint operational access and retain global freedom of action. With global partners, protect the maritime freedom that is the basis for global prosperity. Foster and sustain cooperative relationships with an expanding set of allies and international partners to ensure global security. It all sounds pretty familiar. His priorities, which have been a common thread to most, if not all, CNOs in recent memory, are pretty straightforward. Our Navy must always be ready to meet the current challenge today, and to keep doing that. We must build a relevant and capable future fleet, but the hardware is never enough. We must also develop our sailors and our Department of Navy civilians, and we must take care of their families. Hand in hand with Admiral Greenert, General Amos, our Commandant, laid out his key principles for the Marine Corps, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that the rudder orders of our two service chiefs are completely aligned. The United States Marine Corps is forward deployed and forward engaged, shaping, training, deterring, and responding to all manners of crises. The Corps responds to today's crisis with today's force today. As part of the joint force, the Marine Corps and Navy work together to leverage the significant advantages that amphibious forces provide a maritime power. Forward presence will build on and strengthen our partnerships. We'll provide offshore options to deter influence and win in an era of uncertainty. We'll remain ready to meet the current challenges today, and I quote directly from the Commandant, "We are the Sea Services, the United States Navy's primary joint partner in the U.S. Marine Corps, and we must continue to evolve how we will operate and fight as expeditionary warfare partners." Okay, I'm about to sum it up and give you the cliff notes of what I just talked about, so be ready for your questions. The world has an uncertain future. Second, our nation needs to get our fiscal house in order. Third, the Department of Defense will do its part to do so. And DoD has a strategy that is fiscally sound. Every key budget decision you'll hear in the coming weeks is directly tied to that strategy. And over the next 4 FYDPs, we have the opportunity to adjust fires as we construct the Joint Force of 2020, with the Navy and Marine Corps being significant contributors to that joint force. But some things will not change between now and 2020. From my vantage point, between now and then, I firmly believe the Navy and the Marine Corps will continue to execute the 6 pillars of our national maritime strategy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and these pillars span the spectrum of conflict. The uncertain future will likely keep us continuously engaged in combat somewhere around the world while preventing greater conflict in the rest of the world. Our lifeblood and our greatest strength will continue to come from the men and women of the ships, squadrons, battalions, commands, and staff who man the hardware and execute the multitude of missions they are assigned. These sailors and Marines are the very best of the youth of our nation, and you should be very proud of the youth of our nation. You can applause. Many of those sailors and Marines will be on their first deployment. Others will be adding to the numerous small bronze stars on their seas and overseas service ribbons. Now, I do not like to predict what their future holds, but I feel it is safe to forecast those on deployment and permanently assigned overseas and those back in the States readying for deployment, where their tours and deployments will continue to be hard, they will be long, and they will undoubtedly be the most important tours and deployments of their careers. The sailors and Marines will continue to deploy around the world and will be a part of the most capable Navy and Marine Corps team that ever sailed the Earth's oceans, rivers, gulfs, and rivers. They will continue to be extraordinarily well-trained and equipped to fight and win both low and high-end conflicts. They'll join their teammates around the world in actively fighting against violent extremists who would cause harm to peace and prosperity here at home and around the globe. Their prime directive will continue to be to ensure the security of the sea lines of communications, or said another way, maintain the free and safe passage of maritime traffic in international waters, thereby guaranteeing the stability of the global economy. Both current and potential adversaries are forewarned to not test either our sailors and Marines' resolve in preventing conflict or effectiveness once engaged. For their mission is to fight and win the battles at hand and prevent future outbreak of hostilities whenever and wherever they might occur. They will continue to be trained to dominate any battle space assigned, support their teammates ashore, integrate and train with allies, all while doing everything in their power to prevent any miscalculation which might lead to major conflict. But when directed, execute their orders with the swift and effective application of naval combat power coming from sovereign American territory provided by the ships of the United States Navy and manned by shipmates, our sailors and our Marines. And it will be an honor to be a part of the Navy and Marine Corps team for however many days leadership will allow. Now, as I said at the outset, my intent was to provide a broad, high-level overview of our Navy and Marine Corps team set against the backdrop of a DoD strategic review, but please forgive me for adding my own assessment here at the end. I encourage each of you to take the time to look at the documents I have referenced, the Defense Strategic Review, CNO's Sailing Directions, and the Commandant's Key Principles, for I have always found it really a good idea to remember what my boss finds interesting, I find fascinating. Thanks for coming today and for your support for our Naval Institute. We have a few minutes left, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Admiral Lynn Wells, National Defense University. You've mentioned economy, agility, nimbleness. There are a number of emerging commercial capabilities, so open source geospatial, leveraging emergency response in the private logistics train, COTS products, that can bring us capabilities in the field in kind of months for tens of thousands of dollars rather than fit-ups for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the procedures, policies, whatever in place make it hard to cooperate, government, public, private. Are there any procedures underway as part of the view to make it easier for public-private cooperation to take advantage of some of these emerging opportunities?
I was hoping for an easier question out of the chute. At this point, no, we haven't. I mean, we've just gotten the strategy. The budget will be, we'll announce the budget here in the coming weeks. And then we have to go after what you've just very well described, necessary actions to be able to follow through on the strategy. Next question, please. Yes.
Good morning, sir. I'm Terry Casto, a retired defense contractor and a longtime FCN. I appreciate your really cogent remarks and the way you framed up the situation. I think you squared it up exactly as it is. I have a couple of questions. I'll give you one and maybe come back to the mic later. And that is, you've talked about the necessity of maintaining material and personnel. What thought has been given to the impact to the industrial base that this drawdown is going to create? What issues, if any, have been identified, and are there any mitigations or approaches to that problem that have been considered?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, for my elevator talk about, hey, don't go running away. Get stay back up here so I know who I'm talking to.
I thought it was a question. It's going to be a debate. I'm loving this.
I assure you it's not going to be a debate. My key two talking points on where we're going in the future are, the first, there's two must-dos that we have to make sure. One is not break faith with the all-volunteer force. The all-volunteer force is expensive. It's the most capable force we've ever put on the battlefield, and we don't want to go back in time, and we don't want to break faith with that force. And the second thing is we need to remember that, this is the budget is it's a sine wave, and so we're on the backside of the sine wave, but it's going to get better. It's going to go up in the future. And so we need to recognize, we just don't know when it will get better, but it will go up. And so we want to be able to capitalize when the times are better. And in order to do that, you need to invest in your seed cord. And that means you need to protect the industrial base. And a part of the industrial base that people forget about is the intellectual piece of the industrial base as well. So as we're on the backside, we need to invest in that capability that we project we're going to need in the future, and then also protect that industrial base. Absolutely critical. Okay.
Thank you.
You can sit down now.
Thank you, sir. Ron Oxley, Wide Point. Congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
First, as you adjust the budget to fit your strategy, is Congress playing any role at this time? Can I sit down?
Yeah. Yeah. Congress has a huge role in this, and we're submitting the budget. That doesn't mean we're going to get that budget that we submit. So it's going to be up to the services to articulate their needs, their requirements, and always come back to why it's so important that we do the right thing, keeping it focused on the strategy. Yes, sir. Next question.
Good morning, sir. Petty Officer Gothier, SACIR Strategic Communications. Admiral Harvey, currently at Fleet Forces Command, has a fairly robust blog. I'm just interested to know if you are interested in maintaining the blog that Fleet Forces Command currently has.
Yeah, the forum, absolutely. The media, how you communicate with the force has really evolved. It used to be really nice just being able to transmit personal forum messages, and then it would guarantee to get to everybody in the fleet. But now you need to reach out and touch the force in many ways, and whether it's the blog, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, however you can get your message across to the force is what you need to do. But there's a fine line there. It's not the chain of command. You still execute orders and you transmit orders through the chain of command. But if there's an important issue and focus points, then that's a very valuable way to get the point across.
Aye, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Father Richard Halverson. My background before becoming a priest was in aerospace engineering and also electronics engineering, and I served in that capacity for the military in Westpac. So I instituted the Tempest program, if you recall that. I also fought for the volunteer draft, as opposed to the draft, I'm sorry. I think one problem that we have is one of perspective. So you brought up, first of all, Arab Spring. I think that's a misnomer. This is actual tribal warfare that we're confronting, not national. So for example, I'll just give Libya as an example. People say, well, Gaddafi, look at how he dressed. Isn't that odd? Well, he's a Bedouin. I don't know if you could classify him broadly within the context of being an Arab per se and generalizing. The native people of that area are Berbers. There are other people there, the Tariq, for example, who are mostly black, and many of them lived in Misrata. That whole community was destroyed from both sides. Originally, that was a tribal nation with two capitals, one in Benghazi and one in Tripoli, and the king lived in Trabuk. And the tribal areas were left pretty well independent on their own. It worked, though. And I think this perspective of looking at Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Iran as nationhood is a concept which is foreign and does not resolve things in these particular contexts. Another thing that you were talking about was the national debt, which I think is a problem. I think American people are resilient if they can be left to their own means. However, we have established a society, including the military, based on entitlements and benefits.
Sir, one of the things we need to do.
Ask you, sir, would you please give us your question?
Okay, the question on the first is that we need to change
I'll just go right to the answer. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
The second one is entitlements. And we've based things on recruitment and everything else based too much on the entitlement mentality. Cliff investing or entitlement or vesting in the civilian sector was done by ERISA. And we have the cliff vesting at 20 years and 30 years. Many people are being terminated prior to their 20 year. They're out the door completely. Can we come in with a defined contribution plan as opposed to a defined benefit and base other things more on self-resilient, more reliance upon individual initiative rather than this entitlement mentality? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Next question, please.
Good morning, Admiral. Colonel Mark Sincil, United States Marine Corps, retired. Just want to thank you in advance for answering my question.
Provided there is one.
Unlike the last question, there is a question. In 2010, the Secretary of Defense issued a directive regarding insourcing as a means to try to save the Department of Defense upwards of 20–25% of their existing budget. As we know now, it has not proven to yield those savings, and that still to this day, defense contractors can still do the work at a much greater savings to the Department of Defense. Each of the service components have taken a different stance, although the DoD agencies have overturned their decision to insource. I'd like to know, going forward, in light of these budget cuts, what is the Department of Defense, specifically the service components, from your perspective, what will be their stance on government insourcing?
The conversion from contractor to government employee, or the emphasis to go from being to reduce our government employees and go out to contract, quite frankly, it appears to me, and I haven't been in the Beltway very long or often, it appears to be more a function of politics than necessity. there is no question that contracting can save the government money, provided you hire the contractor for what it needs to be, what the contractor needs to be done, which is a short duration to achieve a project, help with a particular project or a particular skill set, and then we don't have to pay the lifetime cost of a government employee. Conversely, if it's an enduring mission, then we want to go, it's cheaper for the government employee. So it's really up to the services to make sure they find the right balance there. And I can tell you, as the Chang on the Joint Staff, we don't have the right balance on the Joint Staff, partly because of the different administrations, politics that come and go, and whatever emphasis what party wants to use, or else because we don't have the discipline to ask the hard questions ourselves. When we did this study on the Joint Staff, we have contractors that are on their 5th or 6th, 7th different contractor over 20 years. Same people, 20 years, working contractor stuff, and that's not saving us any money. So once again, it's putting discipline in the process. What is the task that you need accomplished? What is the manpower you need to accomplish that task? Which the proper fit and fill, and go after and tackle it that way. Okay?
Good morning, Admiral. I'm Petty Officer Holt from Navy Information Operations Command, San Diego.
Okay.
I had a question about...
What type of computer do you have at home?
I built my own computer, sir.
All right. This one's going to be hard. Go ahead.
I'm pretty simple. I'm wondering about, with the budget cuts and the reshaping of the force and ERB, do you foresee any changes in active duty military requirement changing to match the new 2020 plan that you guys are shaping in now?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to. We have to shape the force to meet the future capabilities. Absolutely. I hope that answered it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir Lieutenant Ben Coleman, VMFAT 101. I've heard you speak on numerous occasions, one on the USS Nimitz when you were sent, or NAV sent, another time at Talc, and I thank you for your candor. A couple of weeks ago, I think you were quoted about reducing the number of flag officers, saying it's very difficult to do so, and I would agree. But in a time of force restructuring, when a lot of junior officers, particular in the Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, are getting cut pretty easily, how do we shape the force such that our tail-to-head ratio maintains effective in the warfighting regime?
Okay, well, thanks for asking that. Yeah, I ran an effort for Secretary Gates to reduce flag or general officers by 50. We ended up doing it. We were overachievers, and we reduced the number of general and flag officers by 104. Most of that was from the services themselves. From the joint world, we grew the joint general flag officers for the war. You know, we don't need but a couple of those for Iraq now, so all of those we're able to do away with those. But what we also did with the services before we went into this is to have the services rack and stack their general officers and flag officers. Number one must have, and then we forced them to bend 20% in nice to have. And that really allowed us to go after. And so the majority of the cuts that we, of the reduction of the flag and general officers actually came from the services as they're trying to get their executive leadership at the right level to match the capability that they need. And it does take time to do that. And we've given them a lot of levers in order to do that, to shape that force. And you'll see, I will tell you, you're seeing it firsthand. If you were a captain out of major command waiting to get flag, or a colonel in any of the other 3 services looking for your first star, all the services are selecting fewer numbers on the 1 stars and 2 stars to meet this future. We gave them 5 years to get rid of these 105 so that we do it correctly and we don't jeopardize careers, quite frankly, at your rank as we work our way there.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Cole Krumholtz. I'm a former surface warfare officer, and after my time in the service, I moved out to Silicon Valley. I'm currently on my 2nd startup. And my question is, do you see Silicon Valley as an important partner in achieving the nation's technology strategy, and how do you motivate innovative startups to get involved? Thank you.
I don't have a good answer for that second one. But for the first one, absolutely. I mean, you will see major investments in technologies that, quite frankly, rely on your neighborhood in the future. We have to invest there. This came up at a breakfast. This is the IT world. It's a tough business to be in, and it's even harder for the services to come to grips with it. You know, the way as you guys are overachievers in Silicon Valley, I mean, you're pushing technology quicker than we can consume it. And when you apply that into our procurement cycle, we're always in lag when it comes to the IT world. The next piece is it's a frustration for most of us that we don't treat the IT world as a weapon system. And we identify and buy capability as a weapon system. All too often we buy it through stovepipes and proprietary measures and then rely on coolie labor to fuse it together. So that's the answer to the second part that we got to go figure out in the future. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure enough.
Good morning, sir. Nora Pencola, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. Briefly, what changes do you see as being necessary in acquisitions policy to facilitate the rapid acquisitions and accelerated acquisitions that you'll need to undergird the changes to rapid deploying forces?
You didn't go to Elon, did you? We have to fix our acquisition process, and I would defer to Admiral Terry Blake when he gets up here and ask him that question. He really has to suffer through that particular process, but we have to go after and fix that process.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Good morning, Admiral. Bob Cunningham. As an engineer, one of the things that surprised me the most as our push in technology to get more efficient, more functionality, during the past 10 years in the ramp up, a huge surprise was the importance of fuel and the cost of getting fuel to a theater, how quickly we burn through it. Do you see the future fighting force becoming less dependent on fossil fuels and more efficient in the energy we do use?
I think, well, I can tell you, all of the services are working hard at doing just that. How much of a return on that effort, I think we have to wait and see. There are clearly some procedural and mindset things we can do that would save huge savings, but we've been doing that, well, in the Navy for quite a long time, especially afloat. But it really comes down to, if you want I'm going to give you Shortney's answer to this, and I'm not an engineer, but until we develop an alternative energy source with a storage and distribution system that took 150 years to develop that we're using today, I don't see it. So yeah, there's some things we can do to make ourselves more effective, but you know, in a gallon of gasoline, there's a hell of a lot of energy in that. And so, you know, it can take a 5,000-pound car and drive it 30 miles. So where is that golden BB that's going to be out there that also has the storage and distribution system attached to it that we have, because we project power at great distances. And then we rely on a global storage and distribution system to support that forward deployed force. So we have a lot of work to do on this one, but we are a very small part of a global problem that we have to get our hands around. And it's developing that alternative energy source that's out there with that storage and distribution. They have to go together. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I'll defer to the Admiral. Good morning, sir. Herb?
Sir, getting back to the Silicon Valley and the lag in DOD and taking advantage of what's being developed there, has the restructuring of the J6 and the elimination of the NII, has that helped or hindered that lag?
Well, you're putting me in a rough spot here. I see the elimination of the J6 and NAII effort that General Cartwright was the spearheading for as the tip of a larger problem. The services and DOD are spending billions of dollars on IT. I don't think we really have a good idea how much we're really spending because any command can go out and buy a server and a computer and work it into their network as long as it meets the CIO's guidelines for whatever that particular service is. So we really don't know how much we're spending on it. And so what we're trying to do is get our arms around how much we're spending and deliver a capability to the Joint Force that we can all use. Because right now the way we're doing it, it's not only really expensive, and an expense we don't really understand how much we're spending on, and two, it's not defendable. And so what forces leadership to come to the conclusion that they need to go after and fix this problem is either one, the threat to their network, which is a weapon system, or two, the cost. And right now we are under attack from around the globe. Our networks are under attack. Both our unclassified and secure networks are under attack from around the globe. And they're costing us a fortune. So we have to go after and fix that. So the problem is much bigger than the J6 NAII problem. Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. So I've watched with interest the last 6 months as DOD and Intel has dealt with this budget replanning and the aspect of the $480 billion that you talked about this morning. So if Congress doesn't get their collective heads out of whatever orifices they've got them parked in, it goes beyond 480. We get to sequestration, and it's like 900 billion. What consideration have you given, or can you give us any broad strokes on what that environment looks like?
Well, for the record, I didn't say where Congress has their head. You did.
That's true. I take full responsibility for that snide comment. It's going to be a very grim picture if that occurs. Very grim. But I think in that regard, we have members in Congress who are very supportive of the Department of Defense and the defense of this nation. And they're willing to invest a lot of money into it. They want to make sure they're getting the best value for that investment. And so I think we'll be okay there. But I cannot predict after the elections what's going to happen. We will have to redo the strategy if that does occur. But you heard Secretary Gates said it. You heard Secretary Panetta say it. You know, we're not going to fix the nation's fiscal problems using DOD budget alone. It's just not going to happen. We have to go after the other ways that we are spending money within our government and the other mechanisms that we bring in revenue. It's that simple. And people have to come to the table, have the discipline and leadership to make the tough decisions that need to occur. Okay.
Admiral Gortney, thank you very much for the remarks, for coming all the way out here to the West Coast to escape the Pentagon. And we'd like to present you, on behalf of AFCEA and the Naval Institute, a new Naval Institute press book called Joe Rocheford's War. This is a big year, 70th anniversary of the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Midway. And this is the first biography of Joe Rocheford, first complete biography, and we'd like you to have it as our gift. So thank you very much for speaking. We really enjoyed your remarks.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it.